Hello, my friends. Welcome once again to Spiritism, a closer look. You are on Kardec Radio. I'm Luiz Lima, your host for tonight. If you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions, you can always go to the information down on your screen. You can always go to kardecradio.com. You can come to our Facebook page, or you can use the email address listed there for questions and comments, suggestions. And even if you want to suggest a topic for discussion so we can bring it over and talk about it. Tonight, we are going to take a closer look at Darwin and Spiritism. Darwin and Spiritism. I think the question is always somehow, at least we get a lot of this from people. Do we align with Darwin's theory, or even the other way around? Does Darwin's theory align with Spiritism? Is he our friend? Is he not? We get a lot of questions about it. So that's the reason we decided to bring this over. Let's try to understand and clarify, and hopefully we're going to do the right job tonight. For us to make this, quote, judgment, a better word would be analysis. For us to do this analysis, we need to take a really quick crash course on Darwin's work and its history, because there's a lot of things in his work that are little tiny details, but they make a difference when we put Darwin's work and Spiritism side by side. So really quick. He was born in an upper-class family, so family was wealthy. His father and his grandfather, they were well-known people in the society, in their profession, in their work. They were all in the health business, doctors. They were very well-known. Darwin was baptized in the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church is part of Christianity, but it's a more restricted form, at least it was in those days. They did not accept all the books in the Bible. They had their own adaptations to the Bible because, it was a form of Christianity. Still Christian, still based on Jesus' teachings and so, but it had some, especially regarding the Old Testament, you had some things that they didn't like much, so they left it out. Anyway, so he, as a young child, he was going to the Anglican Church. Then he grows up, he goes to the university to study medicine because that's what the family lineage, they're all doctors. He didn't perform well. He went to study science. He didn't perform well, but he had contact with the theory of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, which we're going to address this on a separate live another time. We're going to come back to him just a little bit. But Jean-Baptiste Lamarck he wrote the first paper ever, the first book ever on evolution from the scientific point of view. So because of his Darwin's poor academic performance, his father decided to send him to Cambridge to become an Anglican cleric, and he does. He completes the course, but it's not really what he wants. It's not really what he wants. He had things that he would not really get along with in the Anglican Church. One of them is, there was this guy called James Ussher who wrote a book. He wasn't one of the Anglican bishops at the time. Not at his time, not at Darwin's time. That was in like 1650 or so. And this guy made some calculations, and he came to the conclusion that he found the very day when the world was created, and that was Sunday, October 23rd, 4004 BC. Darwin looks at this and says, this is just too much. That blows my mind. I don't want to do this thing anymore. I don't want anything to do with the church. So he takes off on a trip, on a voyage, a 2-year voyage, on a ship called Beagle. And in there, he reads a lot. One of the books he reads is a book by an Englishman, a scientist also, called Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell wrote a book called The Principles of Geology. And he touches, on the book, he touches with some depth on evolution, species, birds, and stuff like that. And Darwin, reading the book and on the ship and stopping on different places, he was kind of, oh, what this guy's saying here is interesting. Yeah, I see different birds, I see different plants. The beak of some of the birds are the bird itself is very similar to ours in England, but the beak is a little bit different because they take the food in. The food intake is a slightly different. So all of that triggers his mind to put the attention on something more serious in terms of, I want to study this thing. That's my line of work. I'm going to become this biologist / naturalist. And that's what he does. So he starts analyzing species, collecting data, a lot of notes. He was making notes all over the place. 2 years later, he comes back to England and he starts on writing a book with his observations and the answer to his question. And the question was, his whole work was based on finding the answer to this one question. What triggers or what motivates the evolutionary process? You see, it's not a matter of is there evolution or not? No. Evolution, for him, it does exist. It's a thing, for sure. But what triggers it? That was his question. So the entire work was based on the idea to find this answer. We need to take a little bit of time here to look at his work because it matters. His work, how it came about, matters for us to understand where he's coming from, and is he aligned with us, spiritists, yes or no? So I'm going to put this in graphic form because I think it's just going to be easier for us to follow. So he writes his book. It's called the opening book in terms of works on evolution. It's not the first, but it's the one that's going to change everything. So the name of the book is here. You see on your screen, The Origin of the Species. That was in 1859. So this is a reference. 1859, 2 years after the first edition of the Spirits book. First edition, 501 questions. The second edition came in 1860 after his work, or about the same time. So here it is. He writes the book, and what were his considerations? Who made him write the book? What was he reading and going after to be able to write the book? So two things. First of all, he reads the works of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Like I said, it's the first book ever in 1809. You see here the name, Philosophie Zoologique. In French, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck is a French naturalist biologist. It's the first work on evolution from the scientific point of view. So he reads that. Their theories, the final theory of Darwin and the original theory of Lamarck are different. But anyway, he read the book. The second thing is, he read the book, this book here that you see on your screen, published in 1798, an essay on the principles of population by Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus was a church guy. One day he decided, I don't want to be a church guy. I want to be just like my father, an economist. So he goes in, starts making a lot of studies on economics and economy and so. And he publishes this book, an essay on the principles of population. In this book, he's going to say something that's going to raise eyebrows. He says, vegetation grows at a linear proportion. The growth of vegetation is linear. But the growth of animal life is exponential. So there's going to be a problem in the future, sometime in the future. There's going to be a lack of food and resources. That was his view. His view, Thomas Malthus, was totally 100% contrary to the one of his father. And the reason why he was totally 100% contrary to his father's line of thought, he was also an economist and a philosopher, is because they didn't get along. And just for that reason, Thomas Malthus, in order to challenge his father, wrote something contrary to everything his father thought. So he said, again, we're going to have a problem with food because vegetation and animal life do not grow in the same proportion. His father, Daniel Malthus, on the other hand, he was a leader, a local leader in France for the movement, the Age of Enlightenment. And the Age of Enlightenment had one of the great names in the Age of Enlightenment was philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. One of them, not there were many of them. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau, as a philosopher, he was a national leader. His father, Thomas' father, Daniel Malthus, was a local leader, but very close to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Another influence on Daniel was a great economist of the time, David Hume. So you see, there's philosophy here and there's economy. This goes down all the way down to Darwin plus. There's the biggest work ever done before Darwin, which is the work of Lamarck, also a naturalist. So Charles Darwin takes all of this thing and he's going to put a theory together that answers the question. Again, the question is, what triggers or what motivates the evolutionary process? And it takes him a long time. He had almost a 20-year gap trying to gather more information, trying to elaborate the answer on this thing. And he wasn't ready. He never could really reconcile all the elements he was able to gather and all these things he read in the past. He never got to it for 20 years until one day, one commoner, one person, scientist, but not really well known, just a common person called Alfred Wallace. Alfred Wallace finds out that Darwin is working on this thing. And Darwin had a good friend also working on this thing called Lyell. Remember, he had read Lyell when he was on the voyage. So when this guy sends his papers to Darwin in 1858, Darwin looks at it and says, that's my answer. This guy has my answer. So he talks to Lyell. And Lyell says, listen, we got to publish this because that's exactly what you want to do. You want to publish your 50 plus years of experience on this thing. So let's just do it. However, if you publish this under Wallace's name and you attach your name to it, it's not going to have the impact that it should if you have only your name because you're well known, you're wealthy, you're part of the society, and Wallace is not known. He's just a professor. He was just somebody who studied it. By the way, Wallace spent almost, I think, 14 years in the Amazon, working, trying to understand the species and plants and animals. It was a beautiful, huge work, similar to what Darwin had done. However, Darwin, did this for 2 years, and Wallace did for a lot longer. Anyway, so that's the story of how the book came about. So it isn't really 100% Darwin. There are people that debate, plagiarism and other things. It's not our purpose to discuss that here tonight. But this is where he comes from. He's trying to get the answer for something evolutionary. And there's philosophy in the middle of this thing. It's a mix of things. His theory, written by himself, is not perfect. There's still a lot of things that need to be understood. A lot of people, he says that, a lot of people are going to come after me. Hopefully they can fill in all the gaps and the answer that we still don't have. Let's take a quick comparison of what Wallace brought to the table compared to what Darwin had in his mind. That's going to be interesting. So for Wallace, by the way, the theory of evolution, it's actually known as the Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution. Okay. Anyway, for Wallace, evolution was driven by the elimination of the weakest. Weak species or weakest species are going to disappear. So the weak elements of a society will trend to be eliminated. That's Wallace. Darwin. Evolution is driven from the will to survive. It's the survival of the strongest. It might seem the same thing, but it's not really. We're going to come back to this in a little bit. For Wallace, we need to improve, not to be the weakest. Right? So we need to improve, not to be the weakest. For Darwin, we need to struggle to acquire the status of the best at any cost, because it's survival of the strongest. We need to be the strongest at any cost. We will do anything to survive and be the best. So you see how there's a difference in focus here. One is just saying, let's not be the weakest. The other is saying, let's be the best of all at any cost. I'll do anything that it takes to get there. So the underlying message, and that's where the difference starts. The underlying messages. If you belong to the group of the weak ones, how are you going to survive? The best thing you can do is gather all together, put everybody together, and let's go for it. If you would try to do this alone, each one of the elements, it's weak. It's not going to be able to survive. But when you go as a group, you get strength. Then there's a much better chance to survive. So for the message that Wallace sends, the underlying message is cooperation, collaboration. For Darwin, it's not, it's competition at any cost. That's interesting. Now, what makes it interesting is this. Until the works of Darwin, until 1859, everything you wanted to know, you would ask the provider of the truth. The provider of the truth was the church. The church had the absolute answer to everything else. But, there was a point in maybe around the 1600s or so where the answers were not coming. They were not there. You would ask the church, the priest, they would say, this is not something you should ask. You can't question this. You shouldn't be asking this thing. So instead of answering, they were saying, don't ask. So it's kind of the provider of the truth is not bringing the answers that we need as a society. And we've been asking this for centuries, and the answers are not coming. With Darwin, some of these answers start to come. And then what happens is science takes over from that point and becomes the provider of the truth. And it is still today. Still today. If you want to know something, has it been proven scientifically? So Darwin established indirectly, but he did. And the results are out there. We can see anywhere, anytime, any day. Establish a new paradigm. That's called the scientific materialistic paradigm, which is still very much alive today. In the late 1800s, his work is 1859. In the late 1800s, almost next century, something came about with the name social Darwinism. And that was a movement led by a guy called Herbert Spencer. Social Darwinism preconizes improvement of humanity by purifying the race. You see, Darwin never wrote that, but it came out of his work. It was an interpretation, an indirect interpretation of his work. So this is equivalent to assume that there are unfavorable genetic inferiors. There are superiors and inferiors in terms of race. This is still around today because we still live the scientific materialism. We still believe that the provider of the truth is science. All of this so far that I've said is before the works of Mendel, Gregor Mendel, and the discovery of genetics, all of it. Mendel's work was published in the 1860s, never was considered a good work until the early 1900s. So that's almost 40 years after the works of Darwin. And then when Mendel's works comes up, and we look at Darwin's theory, it doesn't match 100%. So it was necessary to make adjustments to Darwin's theory, and then the original Darwinism will become what is called today as neo-Darwinism. We still use the word Darwinism, but what we mean is not the original works of Darwin, is neo-Darwinism. So what is this? First of all, it believes that, or it states that natural selection triggers evolution. And that was the question he was trying to get the answer for. Natural selection triggers evolution. Natural selection depends on the environment. For example, think of an animal with a very long hair. It will be advantageous to this animal in cold weather, but it will not be advantageous in Florida where I live. So it depends on the environment. It makes sense. It's a logical thing. But the problem with the theory is this next thing here. Evolution and mutations, right? Mutations are random. So from time to time, there's a mutation on a species to follow the natural selection, and that mutation is random. And then we don't like what it says as spiritists. It's not that it's wrong. We need to be very clear on this thing. It's a matter of layer. Understanding layer one, there's a next layer. When Moses said, an eye for an eye, he wasn't really wrong, but it's layer one. There will be layers after that will make it more comprehensible. It's the same thing here. There is no right or wrong. The Darwin theory studies the evolution of the species, physical animals, physical plants. The outcome of the theory is focused on evolution of the material forms of animal life and vegetation. Spiritism does not study the evolution of species. Spiritism studies the evolution of the intelligent principle. The intelligent principle needs to goes through its evolutionary path by going through the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. But we are not, we spiritists, we are not studying evolution of the species, how this form transforms into that one. This is not what we study. We study the intelligent principle. And that's one of the things that Darwin does not consider, because it wasn't what he was looking for. It was more restrict. So it's not really wrong. It's incomplete. A better word is incomplete. It's not that it goes against Spiritism or Spiritism goes against it. No, it's a matter of, we need to understand more. We need more layers of knowledge. Spiritism is this additional layer of knowledge. So the form changes from the Spiritist point of view. The form changes not because of random mutations, but because there is intention. It's orchestrated from the spirit world. So at one point, for this particular species to continue its path towards evolution, it's going to be needed, mutation is going to be needed here. So the mutation is not random, it's not accident. It is intentional. And the other thing that Spiritism considers, that goes not against, but goes to the next layer, it's a better explanation. Darwin proposes competition because his theory is restrict. Spiritism never proposes competition. It's collaboration or cooperation. It's the other side of things. So we look at the works of Darwin today, we as Spiritists, and it's hard to say, do we align with Darwin, yes or no? We have to go through an entire explanation, what we try to do here in 30 minutes, more or less, because it's not right or wrong, it's just incomplete. We have more knowledge brought to us through mediumship, right? The ability of bringing information from the spirit world through mediums. We have that information. He didn't. First, he and Kardec, they were living at the same time, by the way, but they never met each other. They didn't get to know each other's work. Not that I know of, not that I could ever find, and I don't see anything documented in that sense. But you see, the purpose of Darwin was not the purpose of Spiritism. Just like Newton. Newton got criticized because people said, Newton, your theory is marvelous, wonderful, but where is God into this theory? And he said, that's not my purpose. I'm looking for answers how the universe works, the universe physical, the planets, the comets, the, whatever galaxies, not the world in terms of divinity and all of that, spirits, no. So the word God or anything in that sense does not appear in Darwin's work either, because it wasn't what he was focusing on. So obviously the criteria is different. If the criteria is different, the outcome cannot be different. But again, it's a matter of understanding where Darwin is coming from, understanding where Spiritism is coming from, put them side by side, and I think the answer becomes a little clear. Hopefully, I was able to convey that to you tonight. Once again, if you want to bring us any comments, any suggestions, any recommendations, we're all open. You have the information down on your screen. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We will be here next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with another edition of Spiritism, A Closer Look. Thank you so much. Be well.